Good morning, everyone. I'm Carol Manetta, your facilitator for today's service. I welcome all of you here in person and those on Zoom. At this moment, I invite those who are able to do so to stand and wave at the camera and greet everyone on Zoom. Okay, so now you can turn your cell phones off. Okay. If you wish to have a particular announcement or joy or sorrow read during the service, please remember to fill out the form that's on the table at the back of this room, and someone will bring them up to me. If you are new here, please ask any of us how to access our website or find out how to get involved in any of our activities. If you would like to receive our newsletter, please ask Deborah Smith, is Deborah Smith here? Or Becky Tanner, and they'll put your name on the email list. Before our service begins, we have a few announcements today. We have a lot of announcements today. Phil Taylor is now in Catalina Post-Acute Rehab in Tucson. If you are going to Tucson, please consider giving her a ride to see Phil. Okay. Tina's office hours are at their regular time this week. Her office hours will be Tuesday, October 17th, from 12:30 to 3:30. Please call, email, or text to set up a time to meet if you can beforehand. She is often in the office other days and is open to meeting with you then as well. Truly Mindful Tuesdays. Come for mindfulness meditation each Tuesday from 11 until noon. We take turns leading it, but don't feel that you have to. Come and try it out. No experience necessary. This week, our region of the UUA, the Pacific Western region, is holding town halls via Zoom this Tuesday, October 17th, from 6 to 8 p.m., or Saturday, October 21st, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific. We are rethinking how to make the region more helpful to churches, and you see Tina to sign in. To hear the Reverend, Julian Jamaica Soto, you will have to go to Phoenix or listen virtually next Friday, October 20th. He is no longer coming Thursday, October 19th to Tucson due to too few tickets being sold for the event there. Sunday, November 5th, we will celebrate Dia de Muertos. Please gather a picture of a deceased loved one or loved ones and bring them with you to Alicia Abrego. Raise your hand. Thank you. By next Sunday, October 22nd. Also, if there is a specific food that reminds you of them and you would like to share it, please bring it on November 5th. Okay. Remember, is it Janice?
Yes.
Boucher.
Boucher.
Janice Boucher's Celebration of Life will be held Saturday, November 11th, 2023 at 2 p.m. Here. Okay, there's a survey for all, and I think Ginger will be presenting forms.
Yes, I will announce.
All right.
Okay, yeah. There are two things. One, you were handed a survey, and there were some questions a group of us wanted to add to the end, and it's up on the slide. So you might want to write it on your survey to finish it later. And imagine looking around yourself in 5 years' time. The first one, you're inside the building. What do you want this church to look like? What do you want to see going on, have here? What would you like it to look like? And then if you're out in the community in 5 years' time, what do you want to hear people saying about us? What are we doing? Who are we? Are we still here? good, important things like that. What you want heard out in the community. So those two questions, put them on your survey, and you can finish it later.
This is for the chalice lighting. It's a responsive reading. It's at number 720 in the gray hymnal, number 720. I will read everything in plain text and invite you to respond by reading everything in italics. You can follow on the slide or in the gray hymnal. It was written by Rabbi Roland B. Gittleson, who was the first Jewish chaplain in U.S. history assigned to the Marine Corps. He received 3 ribbons for his role in the Iwo Jima campaign and preached the address dedication of the Jewish section of the Iwo Jima cemetery. He served as the senior rabbi of Temple Israel in Boston, Massachusetts, from 1953 to 1977. As we start our worship by lighting our chalice, may we acknowledge the many we remember in Rabbi Gittleson's words. In the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember them.
In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we remember them.
In the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them.
In the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them.
In the rustling of the leaves and the beauty of autumn, we remember them.
In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them.
When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them.
When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them.
When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them.
So long as we live, they too shall live, for they now are part of us, as we remember them.
We have joys and sorrows.
So obviously there is a huge sorrow in our world that started Saturday. I am someone who needs to process things a lot, but that can also be an excuse. I think many of us are shocked about what happened, both with the attack of Hamas on Israelis and people from all over the world, but then also now this response from Israel may be a little overhanded. And it's hard when something is complicated. Sometimes I just run until I can have processed it and thought about it. But I think as you use, it is okay for us to think things through. My idea of prayer is thinking something through so that I'm more empathetic, thinking about something in love, spending time with it. So I wanted to acknowledge this great sorrow of what's happening in the world right now. Because we can't run from it, we have to think about it. And I wanted to say that, I wanted to begin by having you just close your eyes and imagine that some disaster washes away your home. Some of you know about this. I apologize if wildfire, earthquake, financial disaster, lack of physical safety have taken your home from you in the past. But it's a gut wrench, isn't it? It's an attack on your identity, on your sense of safety, to lose all your things, to lose the place that felt safe, that brought you comfort and joy. Then imagine your whole region is engulfed by this disaster, and you lose loved ones. The elderly are doing the work of the young, either physically or emotionally, maybe burying the next generations. Then you lose your country, your identity, your language. And To stay alive and safe, you move to a new place where no one speaks your language, no one sees that you have skills, and they don't know what you've been through, right? And you live in a kind of limbo, wondering if you'll ever go back again, or if your new start is your new life forever. That's a complicated set of things to have to live through and feel through, right? That's what migrants feel all around the world. That's what many of us have felt when we've lost our sense of home. And that's, of course, what's happening in Israel on both sides right now. So we may be stunned and shocked and still sifting out what all this means, but I think we can still try to feel our way to empathy and some answers. I personally believe Palestinians need to have a much better deal, their own land, their own way of being, their own government. But I think that the attack by Hamas was atrocious, but Israel's retaliation too extreme. And most of all, I believe it's important to face complexity and pray for a best and right way through, for healing for all peoples, for a better present and future for all in this never straightforward, never easy world. And I'm going to share with you a poem, a reworking of Psalm 23 by the Reverend Maren Tirabassi. She's UCC, but she responds quickly to world events. And I often take what she writes and cleans up the language so it's not so gaudy. But when you're dealing with Psalm 23, it just doesn't work to clean it up. So here we go. This is a psalm for this Sunday, Psalm 23. God is the shepherd of Israel and Palestine, a people who want peace and fear war. God is a child desperate for water and a family terrified for precious hostages. God is in all souls. God waits on every path. This week, the valley of the shadow of death is crowded with God's children, and they have no comfort but our prayers. The prayers of the world for a table where enemies may sit down to speak healing words, to receive an anointing of truth and shatter the cup of death before more is poured out on those who are innocent. Goodness and mercy will follow us, even in these days of fear and grieving, until we build a house of reconciliation and dwell in it together.
We do have one sorrow. It's from Angel Velachar. I am sorry for the dying Palestinian and Israeli children. I dream one day governments spend more on books than bombs. I'm going to be giving you a little sermonette. It's really a kind of a couple of related stories. Back in Michigan, where I came from, I was in the Junior League of Detroit, and we had 1,100 members at that time, and they did big projects. In Detroit, during World War II, all the auto companies turned their production into the war efforts. Everything from rifles to tanks to fighter planes, everything was done there, as well as creating training videos on what to do with them. So Detroit is the third largest video production area of the United States after Los Angeles and New York. And it was a time in the 1980s, before the term hospice was understood and known as a term, that the Junior League of Detroit raised the funds to have a production studio there in Detroit create what was then VHS tapes on hospice. And they had sold it at cost in all 50 states, all the Canadian provinces, London, England, and also in Okinawa, where we had military bases. And that was really quite something. I was in charge of public relations that year and to promote this. And the National Hospice Organization found it was one of their best videos that they were showing across the United States. But it was also at that time when I saw this video, I was struck by a story of one person. He was in his 30s, young children, and he was dying of cancer, and it showed him with a very swollen body from taking all of the experimental drugs at the time, trying to stop it, but it didn't work. So hospice, at that time, all volunteers, set up a marvelous dinner for the wife and the husband to celebrate their anniversaries with champagne and a lavish meal to celebrate all the anniversaries they would never have. That was just one of the stories. You could not see that video with a dry eye. But also, during that time, it was when Oprah Winfrey had her first show when she was still working in Chicago, before she started her own production company, Harpo Productions. So she had on her show someone who had worked with the dying. Again, this is before the term hospice and the concept. And he worked in hospitals, and the doctors told him that these patients were about to die, and if they were able to talk, he would talk to them. And he had talked to hundreds of dying patients. And he said to Oprah that there are two questions that every one of them asked, using different terms, of course, but they asked the same two questions. Am I loved? And did I love well? And it occurred to me when Reverend Tina was presenting some of her work here at our services about the dying, that the people who are left behind, those closest to those who are about to depart, might have those same two questions about the departing. Am I loved? And did I love well?
I really like Carol's questions that people often ask at the end of life. You know, am I loved and did I love well? I think those two are really big. I started working in hospice because my father and brother had been in hospice, and they were the most introverted people in my family. So I didn't know what they were thinking or feeling, and I had an opportunity to work in hospice and find out, right? Of course, I have since learned that everybody's different, that everybody is thinking and feeling something different. But for me, it has been an honor to walk with people as close as I can get, to let them know they're not alone, to be with them and be unafraid and to not be judgmental, and to walk with them, to be as loving as I can be, going into what they're afraid of, going into what other people are afraid of, hearing the things they're too scared to tell other people. It has been an honor to do that. And I think maybe some of the most important work we can do is walking in love there and beyond. So today I'm looking at a little bit of the complexity, a little bit of what's changed, a little bit of how we make sense of this mystery, right? We don't know what happens in death, and human beings don't like sitting in the unknown, do they? Right, but we as Unitarian Universalists are pretty good at trying hard not to name things too quickly, to give easy answers. Each one of us here probably has a different understanding of what death is, what might happen after, what should happen before, and because we're Unitarian Universalists, that's okay. Now, for some people, it is comforting to have a pastor stand up and say, this is what you gotta do, this is what you've gotta believe, this will get you through. But a little bit like what I said earlier, it's a mystery, it's complicated, we don't have easy answers. I'm not gonna try to give you any, but that doesn't mean we don't try to make some sense of it all. Try to do things. And over the years, as Unitarian Universalists, we have done different things. A few weeks ago, I talked about a really interesting history podcast called The Pamphlet that only existed a short time. It's now, you can find it. It's archived on a site with Harvard. But two historians look at the history of how we have dealt with burial, let's say, in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, right? Dr. Susan Ritchie, who was at Star King, and the Reverend Sean Neil Barron, who very conveniently got a job in a church, so he had no more time to do the podcast, would look at really interesting historical events in Unitarian Universalism. And one was, I talked about it a few weeks ago, the shift in how burial happened. Living in Concord, Massachusetts, I could see it right there. There are these tiny, crowded, scary cemeteries with stones that are carved with crosses and skulls and really terrifying angels of death. They are not places you want to hang out. I think I told you my best friend woke me up and dragged me out and made me look at this one that just wasn't growing any grass. What did that mean? And this was a really old cemetery from the 1600s. And that's what we used to believe about death. Most of us were predestined to go to hell. Most of us were going to go somewhere pretty uncomfortable and unhappy, and the cemeteries reflected that. But Unitarians evolved and decided that Calvinist idea was a horrible one, and that we don't know what happens, but we can connect to God, as the Transcendentalist thought, to the divine, to the holy, through nature, through the mystery of the beauty of all that's going on around us. And so in 1825, Mount Auburn Cemetery was built because they needed more cemeteries in the Boston area to not be one of these terrifying little city blocks, but a beautiful park. How many of you have been to a park-like cemetery? Right, most of us. That's what cemeteries have been like ever since then, because of a shift in how we believed things. But in my lifetime, I've seen a huge shift. I've complained here about my mother not letting me come to my grandmother's service because she was shown in all her glory in the middle of her own parlor, and I might have been too scared. This summer, I talked with a friend who's 5 years older. He's sort of an adoptive cousin, and he said, yeah, that was the first time, he was about 5 then, that I saw a dead body lying out like that. I was 2, and she knew I'd be scared. But in my childhood, in that part of New England, you didn't use a funeral home. You did it in your own house. You wore the flannel shirt you might have liked. It was very, very honest and simple and homey. And then we went into the funeral homes and the burials. My parents weren't buried. I mean, they are, but they were cremated, and their ashes were put in a cemetery that sees 2 mountains I adore in New England. My brother, my sister-in-law carried him through from California, had to explain what was in her luggage, brought him to New England, and we scattered him on a mountain that shall remain nameless, but Thoreau really liked a lot, probably totally illegally. And luckily, his children are big and strapping and could help carry him up, because that was a heavy, heavy backpack. But my sister-in-law used a beautiful canvas backpack and a large silver spoon, and we all took turns remembering him and talking about him as we scattered his ashes. And poor people walked up, wiping off their faces up the trail. But it's just showing how the way we deal with death has been changing constantly over the centuries, and very rapidly now. How many of you have had a friend put into a church niche? You know, the church is a place that your ashes can go. So they all are different. There's one I go to in the DC area, I think it's Presbyterian. I think I've complained before, when it's behind the pulpit and it looks like mailboxes. In my home church in Bethesda, Maryland, they just dig a hole in the garden and they dump people in there. The ashes go in. There's no recognition. There's no acknowledgement that someone's there. Where my husband's sister has been moved in Phoenix. It's to a church my in-laws go to now, and there's actually a little plaque, but it's set up like a garden, and it's a place for monarchs to come and make a way station on their way, and it's beautiful. Again, it's another peaceful park, not for bodies now, for ashes, but a place to sit and remember the person. But we do so many things, so many different ways now. On the 11th of November, I will attend 2 memorial services. This is a pop quiz. Whose memorial service are we having at 2 p.m. here on November 11th? Janice Boucher, good, good. The first one you don't know. I can attend a service back in Vermont through Zoom and say goodbye to an adoptive cousin person in my life, right? When we had Jim Horton's service here and I had COVID, I did it. I did the eulogy and parts of the service from home on Zoom, right? The way we handle grieving and death has changed over the years. How many of you have heard of water cremation? How many of you have heard of people wearing an outfit that has mushrooms in it so that that's what eats you? I mean, I don't want to be gruesome and weird, but the important thing is it is gruesome, but on either side of this, I'm really talking about love. What is a loving way to remember someone you care about? And what is a loving way for each of us to face our own deaths? If you Google New Zealand coffin clubs, there's also a little song and dance version that they made that National Geographic put up. It was more just to show some of the ways we can make this our own. And in this little song and dance, they say, you know, very often you have to pick out something that's mahogany, that doesn't have much soul. This is about us. And I don't think in this country, in some instances, we do go to the crematoria, we go sit, we wait. But in many countries, there's like a little service. When my grandmother died in Australia, my aunt went and they said some words before she was put in the oven. So imagine most of these people are going to do that, but they're going to do it in style. And a chicken will pop up and cheer their friends. And I see this as an incredible act of love, self-love, preparing, but also for the people who are there remembering you. We should make our own urns. What I took from this was, okay, maybe we could have an urn club or a coffin club, but what we really need is just more love, right? I met on Friday with somebody who's not part of this church, who's grieving the loss of her husband. I would like to have a potluck once a month for people who've lost someone important, like a spouse or companion or any form of companion, but a place to go if you're feeling loss. This helped my mother a lot, to just eat with other widows and widowers, but I would think it would be something bigger than that. So if you're interested, let me know. I want us to do that. I think our mores and our rituals change, but whatever has meaning, whatever allows you to feel love for the person you're saying goodbye to, or show love to the people who are saying goodbye to you, I think that's what matters. A few years ago, I was in an airport, and I saw a book that said, I can't remember it was a program where if you bought it, you could return it at another airport and get a different book. I never returned it. I still own it. Little did I know it was written by a Unitarian Universalist chaplain who, and it's all about some of these complexities of dying and death and how we take care of the people we love. She was married to a Maine state trooper, who was planning when he retired 15 years later to become a Unitarian Universalist minister. And one day, he's hit head on by another car and dies instantly. And as she walks through that, she wants to, this is something you can now do more readily, but in 1996, it was really hard to be allowed to wash and dress your person in the funeral home. And she wanted to do it. And finally, the funeral director said, okay, if those 3 state policemen come with you. And her mother came. And they all did it together, and they put him in his uniform together, and it was actually quite healing. At one point, she works with a little girl named Nina, who's 5, whose best friend, who was 4, dies suddenly. And Nina tells her mother, I want to go visit him and see him in the funeral home. And Nina's mother panics. How do you make that appropriate for children? How do you do that well? Well, when they finally worked it out, Nina had time alone. She went up to Andy. She gave him a shared toy. She talked to him. She did what she needed to do in her way to show and feel love. And isn't that really what it's all about? We don't know what's on that other side, but we do know we still love them and carry them with us, right? And on November 5th, we're going to talk more about that, Alicia and I, as we celebrate Dia de Muertos. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to talk more about the complex feelings we feel about grief or just in life. But as Unitarian Universalists, some of the stuff I think is pretty simple. It's about love. Is love simple? No. And we need to learn how to show ourselves self-love and walk with other people in the things we're scared of, but don't need to be. Because love never ends, right? It really doesn't. Thank you all.
As we end worship and extinguish this chalice, but not the spirit of this community or the insight and love we have shared, may we take these words from the poet Mary Oliver to heart. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go.